Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee and today I want to talk about the best rules for new wargamers. You know, one of my favourite things about this hobby, and I think this will resonate with a lot of you, is the way the best ideas and the best questions often come straight from the community. Someone will drop a comment or send me a message and it just lights up that little spark that makes you think, yeah, that's something worth talking about. And this week a subscriber sent me one of those questions that's simple on the surface but actually gets right to the heart of what we do. They asked, what should we look for in a set of Wargames rules when you want to introduce a new player to the hobby? Now I think that's such a good question because it isn't just about choosing a game, it's about welcoming someone into the hobby, helping them find that moment of discovery that we all had once. You remember it, don't you? That first game that just clicked. Maybe it was the feel of miniatures that you were moving across the table, the sound of dice rolling around, the thrill of watching your little army actually do something. And from that moment, you were hooked. So when we talk about introducing new players, what we're really talking about is how do we pass on that spark? How do we make that first experience fun and engaging and memorable rather than overwhelming and confusing? Of course, there's no single perfect answer. The right set of rules depends on the person you're introducing, what they enjoy, what you think will capture their imagination. If your friend is into history, you might go straight for something like Bolt Action or Black Powder or Hail Caesar. If they're coming from board games, maybe Memoir 44 or Blood Red Skies or something with a bit of structure and visual appeal that will ease them in. And if they're the sort of person who loves stories and characters, RPG players for instance, then a narrative game like Sharp Practice or Chain of Command can be perfect. The trick is matching the game to the player, not the player to the game. And I think that's something that more experienced wargamers like us sometimes forget, isn't it? We get excited. We want to show them our favourite system, the one we've spent years learning and tweaking and building armies for. We want them to see what we see. But from the outside, a lot of war games can look like complete chaos. Charts, dice, templates, rules, rule books, order markers. And for someone brand new, it's not obvious why we find that fun. So if you're teaching someone new, the first thing you need is a game that feels approachable. That doesn't mean dumbed down or stripped of depth. It just means it's inviting, something that gets them rolling dice, making decisions and having fun within a few minutes, not after an hour of explanations. And that's where clarity comes in. The best introductory rule sets are the ones that make sense as you play them. You shouldn't need a legal background or a PhD in probability to understand what the hell is happening. The rules should guide you naturally through the action with clear outcomes and minimal exceptions. For me, that makes something like Bolt Action work so well for beginners. The order dice mechanic keeps things simple and unpredictable. Draw a dice, give it to a unit, give an order to a unit, resolve it, move on. It's fast, it's interactive, and it doesn't bury new players under a pile of cross-references and modifiers. Now compare that to some of the older, more complex systems. Wonderful though they are, when you're flicking between tables to check whether your rifle fire at medium range counts as 4+, 5+, or possibly 6+, depending on whether the target's uphill or slightly damp, there's a certain nostalgic charm to that sort of detail once you're invested. But when you're just starting out, it's like being handed a tax form in a foreign language. You want a game that explains itself as you go, where every role has a very clear purpose and where players feel confident about what's happening. Because the moment someone feels confident, they start thinking tactically. And once they start doing that, they're no longer a beginner, they're a player. And pacing is another big one. The best games for newcomers keep everyone engaged all of the time. If one player is sitting there watching while the others moves 12 units, fires 6 batteries, conducts morale checks and then flips to the next page of the rulebook, well, that's not fun for anybody, especially not someone learning the ropes. Alternating activations or reactions keep the energy flowing. You want something where both players feel like they're in the game from start to finish. I think that's the part of why skirmish games have become so popular. They're intimate, fast and full of little moments of tension and excitement. A new player can see the results of their choices immediately rather than waiting half an hour to find out whether their cavalry ever even reached the enemy line. Now when I'm introducing someone to wargaming, I like to start small, and I mean really small. A couple of squads, a single tank, maybe even just a a patrol scenario. It's enough to give them a taste of how things work, but not enough to drown them in details. It's like teaching someone to swim. You don't just throw them straight in the deep end, of a full divisional battle, for instance. You let them splash around in the shallows until they're confident enough to go further. And when you're ready, then you can start introducing new mechanics, artillery, morale, command rules, all the good stuff. But not until they've had that first little victory that makes them smile. Which brings me to what I think is one of the most powerful ingredients of all, and anyone who's followed this channel and listened to me before will expect me to say storytelling. Now, because ultimately that's what makes the hobby magical. Every game we play, every miniature we paint, every scrap of terrain we build, it all contributes to a story. And stories are what make people care. When you're teaching someone new, you don't have to talk about objectives and victory point totals. You can just say, your platoon's been cut off, you need to break through that farmhouse before the enemy reinforcements arrive. Suddenly it's not about numbers, it's about tension and bravery and imagination, and the best rule sets encourage that. They don't just simulate, they inspire new players. That's why I say that the most memorable games aren't necessarily the most balanced ones. They're the ones where something dramatic or ridiculous or heroic happens, where the dice go wild, or a single figure survives against all odds, or a desperate charge pays off. Those are the games people talk about afterwards. I once taught a friend what a tanker, just 2 tanks, a tiny board, a quick setup. Within 10 minutes his Sherman had blundered straight into my sights and was frantically reversing while shouting, cover me, across the table. The room was in hysterics. By the end of it, we didn't care who technically won. He was hooked because the story was just great. And that leads naturally into the importance of presentation. Wargaming is a visual hobby. The rules are what make it function, but the look and feel of the table are what makes it come alive. When you're showing the hobby to someone new, that first impression really matters. You don't need a massive convention display or professionally painted miniatures, though if you've got them, absolutely fantastic. But a small, tidy painted setup can do wonders. A handful of well-painted figures, some good-looking terrain and a bit of atmosphere will do far more to capture someone's imagination than a grey sea of unpainted plastic or metal. People respond to things that look cared for. It says, this matters, and that enthusiasm is contagious. Of course, not everyone who discovers wargaming falls in love with it through the game inside first. Some get hooked by the painting, the modelling, the artistry of it all, and that's just as valid. Arguably one of the greatest strengths of this hobby is how many different ways there are to enjoy it. Some people love the tactical side, others love the creative side, and plenty of us enjoy both in equal measure. So when you're introducing someone new, don't just talk about the dice and rules, talk about the freedom of building and painting your own little armies, of creating something with your hands that then becomes part of the story. That combination of craftsmanship and imagination is something that you don't really get with any other hobby. If we're talking about imagination, we have to talk about theme, because while most of us here are historical players, and I've always had a soft spot for the realism and research that goes into that, history can also be intimidating for newcomers. Not everyone knows or even cares about the exact composition of late war German platoons or the uniform details of the 95th Rifles, and that's okay. You can start with something familiar. Maybe they've watched Band of Brothers or Zulu, or they love medieval films, or they're into ancient mythology. Start there. Find the connection that excites them. Once they've had a taste of the gameplay, the historical detail will follow naturally. I've seen people start out with bolt action just because they liked World War II movies, and within a year they're quoting Osprey books and debating the merits of different camouflage patterns. It happens naturally once the interest has been lit. Accessibility matters too. You don't want to hand someone a rule set that assumes they already own 300 miniatures, half a dozen dice types and a table the size of a cricket pitch. Keep it achievable. The best introductory games are the ones that can be played on a small table with a modest collection. That's why games like One Page Rules or Song of Blades and Heroes, or even Flames of War's smaller scenarios can work so well. They give you that sense of a proper battle, but without the mountain of prep work. The easier it is to get going, the more likely it is that your new player will come back for a second game. And honestly, once that second game happens, it's usually too late for them. They're in. They've caught the bug. They're browsing eBay at midnight, eyeing up resin models and pretending they only need a few more figures to round out that army. That's when you know you've done your job properly. But all of that depends on one final ingredient, and that's fun. Now I know it sounds obvious, but it's easy to forget in a hobby that often prides itself on detail and realism. Fun doesn't have to mean silly, it just means the game leaves you smiling at the end. The best introductory games are the ones that generate laughter, surprise and excitement. They create those little bursts of joy that remind us why we love pushing toy soldiers around a table in the first place. New players don't care whether the armour penetration values are historically precise, or if the turn sequence perfectly mirrors Napoleonic command doctrine. They care whether the game feels satisfying, whether they get to do something cool, whether the dice tell a good story. So when you're introducing someone new, don't worry about teaching every rule perfectly. Focus on making the game enjoyable. If they're grinning by the end, they'll want to come back for more. And that brings us to something that's maybe more important than any rulebook. Us, the people doing the introducing. Because at the end of the day, we are the ambassadors of this hobby. The first experience someone has doesn't just depend on the rules, it depends on how we play. If we act like gatekeepers, or if we treat every rule like it's carved in stone, we risk turning people away. But if we're patient, encouraging and enthusiastic, if we laugh off mistakes, explain things clearly and celebrate the good moments together, that's what makes people want to stick around and come back for another game. Now I've always believed that what new players remember most isn't the mechanics, but the feeling. Did they feel welcome? Did they feel clever when they made a good move? Did they laugh when something went spectacularly wrong? That's what matters. And if we can make that first experience positive, the hobby will take care of the rest. So what should we look for in a set of wargaming rules when we want to bring someone new into the hobby? Look for clarity. Look for pace. Look for story. Look for a game that plays fast, looks great and makes people laugh. But most of all, look for something that reminds you of why you love this hobby. Because that enthusiasm is absolutely contagious. If you're having fun, they're having fun. And if they have fun, they will be back. That's how this hobby grows. Not through marketing campaigns or corporate strategies, but through people sharing what they love. That's why I still think wargaming, historical or otherwise, is the best hobby in the world. It combines creativity, strategy, craftsmanship, friendship, a dash of chaos, all rolled into one. And when you show that to someone new in the right way, you're not just teaching them a game, you're inviting them into a lifelong obsession, into a whole community of really friendly people. So now it's your turn. What's your go-to set of rules when you're introducing a new player? What's worked for you and what hasn't? Have you found that certain settings or scales are easy to teach with? Or maybe you've had one of those unforgettable moments when a new player's first game turned into an absolute legend. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories and your experiences, so drop them in the comments below. Because as always, the best part of this hobby is the conversation, and that's something we can all be part of. So that's it for this week. As always, please join the conversation in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share, and maybe consider becoming a member. And of course, if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from the channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming and of course, keep rolling high.